Sponsored by New Orleans Distillers, creators of fine spirits and liqueurs. Through dedication to science, art, and passion, blends of tradition and flavor emerge. For you, always locally crafted. New Orleans Distillers, classically Southern.
This week on Wall Street Wrap-Up, the October CPI report was released and inflation cools as stocks soared. And the stock market had a party on the better-than-expected inflation numbers, but will this rise in the stock market continue? And crypto crashes as the crypto exchange FTX goes bankrupt, losing over $44 billion in just 1 week. I'm Andre Laborde. We've got these stories and more. It's Friday, Veterans Day, and that means it's time for Wall Street Wrap-Up. Hi, I'm Andre Laborde. Welcome to Wall Street Wrap-Up on this Veterans Day, Friday, November the 11th, 2022. I hope your week went well. Well, coming up tonight, Bill George is going to be with us. Bill's the former CEO and chairman of the board of publicly traded Medtronic. He's senior fellow professor of ethics at Harvard Business School and author of 8 books on leadership. We'll be discussing his new book called True North Emerging Leader Edition. That's Bill George coming up. But first, this week, the Bureau of Labor Statistics came out with October's CPI report. The CPI for October was up 0.4% for the month of October. And year over year, it was up 7.7% from October of 2021 to 2022. Now, for the year ending in October, gasoline rose 17.5%. Electricity went up 14%. Utilities were up 20%. And fuel oil for those winter months and in the northeastern sector of the country, I know you'll be feeling that 68.5% increase year over year. Well, this made Wall Street happy. Why? Well, because they were expecting higher inflation numbers. They were monthly declines, though, in areas of medical care and declines in also used vehicles and apparel. And stocks, they soared. Prices of food essentials year over year was up as meat rose almost 3%. Fish rose almost 7.5%. Coffee, need that cup of Morning Joe in the morning, that rose 14.8%. And fruits and vegetables rose just over 9% for the year. And in the market, it was a great week for all the stock indexes. Well, how did the market finally do for the week? Well, the markets ended. It was up the S&P's best week since June, the leader of the week. And that leader was technology stocks soaring. Healthcare stocks was up for the worst performer in the S&P. Well, the Dow Jones ended the week at 33,750, which was up just over 4% for the week. And the S&P 500 ended the week just under 6%. And also the NASDAQ, they ended at 11,323, which was up just over 8% for the week. And the bond market, because it was Veterans Day, was closed today. Last week, cryptocurrencies firm FTX was valued at just over $44 billion. And the founder, the CEO, Sam Bankman-Fried's net worth was estimated to be at over $4.5 billion. In fact, Fortune magazine even thought of him as the next Warren Buffett. Well, this week, the world's second largest crypto exchange has gone bankrupt. The crypto exchange FTX lent billions of dollars worth of customer assets to fund risky cryptocurrency bets. As mentioned, last week the firm was valued at about $44 billion just last week, but today they filed for bankruptcy, Chapter 11. And they lent risky crypto bets and leveraged their accounts 125 to 1. Now, to give you an example, if you borrow on your account and borrow 50% of your account to buy more shares of stock, you're leveraged 2 to 1. This cryptocurrency company leveraged customer assets of 125 to 1. Creditors that are owed by FTX filing bankruptcy will be over 100,000 investors at least, and many well-known and so-called knowledgeable investors on Wall Street. By the way, Bitcoin from year to date is down over 63.5% from January 1st. Now, to possibly put this in perspective, many remember Enron's blowup of the company and their stock. When Enron went under, their liabilities were about $23 billion. The estimate of liabilities owed by FTX crypto exchange is in the area of $10 billion to $50 billion and calculating. That's a $40 billion range. Well, as the stock market was going down these last weeks and months, it showed FTX's vulnerabilities. You know, as Warren Buffett famously said, when the tide goes out, you can see who's been swimming naked. Well, that's a good segue into our guest, Bill George, this evening. He's former CEO and chairman of Medtronic. He served on many boards, including ExxonMobil and Goldman Sachs, and he's written a new book about leadership. Best of all, he's here with us tonight. Hi, Bill. Welcome to Wall Street Wrap Up.
Andre, it's great to be back with you. Thanks for having me.
Bill,
Privilege.
I read your book. How are the leaders today? And do you think that we need to tweak to be able for the new leaders of tomorrow?
Well, we're going through a massive generational change in leadership. It's much more than going from the baby boomers to the Gen Xers and millennials and Gen Z. It's really a change in approach. I think for 30 years, we've had the baby boomers using command and control as their approach. Today's leaders and today's people are not going to follow that kind of leader. So I think we need a whole different approach to leadership. The second thing, Andre, you know, things were pretty stable back when I was CEO in the 90s, even the 80s. And then we had 9/11, we had the global meltdown. But, you know, if you think about it, today we're dealing with multiple intersecting crises. It takes a very different kind of leader to lead in a crisis than it does in stable times. Anyone can kind of manage those stable times when things are going the way you predict them.
As a CEO, and also before getting to the C-suite, maybe the CFO and such, you're constricted sometimes with the way you have to govern, I'll use the term govern, as compared to the way you used to in prior. I mean, you've got HR, you've got other, you've got HR, you've got unions, which you've always had those areas, but they're much more in more command and control maybe than they were maybe 20, 30, 40 years ago?
Well, you've just named the big change. Employees today have agency, and they're not just going to put their heads down and do the job. They want to know, does your company have a purpose? Do you have a climate change plan? Do you have a diversity, equity, and inclusion plan? Why am I working here? What are your values? And if you can't answer those things, they'll move on. So the baby boomers typically say, oh, these people want to change jobs. I said, you know why they're changing jobs? Your company doesn't have a purpose other than making $2.61 a share.
Do you find that you have to change or adapt to the employee that you're trying to deal with? Maybe some may take one type of an approach, and some you can't use that type of an approach. You have to use another way.
I think it's more you're adapting to the change in situation. When you're leading through a crisis, it's very different than when you're leading through stable times. And I think that's what you have to adapt to. And yes, you have to be keenly in touch with the way the millennials are thinking, the Gen Zers, the Gen Xers in your organization. And of course, my view is you open up the door and give them a chance to lead. Bring more of those people into your leadership team. Bring them on your board of directors. Give them the opportunity that no one else is willing to do. Because a lot of times the more senior leaders don't really understand how to motivate today's leaders and workers.
How about you, Bill? I mean, for our viewers who watch the show know, I mean, you not only were the CEO of a publicly traded company, you were the chairman of the board, you've sat on many other different types of boards as well, too. Has your definition of success changed throughout the years?
Mine hasn't really changed. I always want to make a difference in the world, and my purpose is to help people reach their full potential. But I think our overall definition we've realized that this idea of chasing money, fame, and power, which so many were doing, we still have people doing that, is totally flawed. It's not going to work. People today want to find significance more than they want to just achieve short-term success. And the media tells us everyone's got to have a bigger house, a bigger car, a bigger title, more money, more net worth. No, it's about much more than that. It's about how did I make a difference in the lives of people? How did companies that have that kind of central purpose are doing really well. They're flourishing today. Those that don't are having difficulties.
In the book, you interview a lot of different well-known leaders and
Hmm.
about their traits, their characteristics and such. Was there anything that surprised you that was a common trait with each of the different type of leaders that you interviewed for the book?
Well, I would say it's amazing to me because I wrote my first book back in 2003 because I felt like we had the wrong kind of leaders. We were worshiping charisma and image and things like that. And I'm impressed now with today's leaders and how authentic they're trying to be. Most of them are coming from within their organizations, not coming from outside. Take Mary Barra at General Motors, totally transforming what was a moribund culture. Good for her.
Mhm.
Satya Nadella at Microsoft, spectacular job at changing the culture from know-it-alls to learn-it-alls.
That's a good point you brought up about the head of Microsoft, Nadella, because prior to him, there was Steve Ballmer. And
Yep.
if you're looking at opposite 180-degree type of a leader where, I mean, I've never talked to the present CEO of Microsoft, Nadella, but he seems to me, when I've seen him, a very low-key type of person. So he gets his leadership through one way. Scott Ballmer, I've heard that he's even blown his vocal cords out from screaming when he used to be the CEO, not when he was screaming at a person, but when he was giving these pep rallies and such, that I guess now he should be doing when he's doing at the his own NBA team. But those are two opposite types of leaders.
One's certainly right for today's era. Steve Ballmer would never make it. In fact, he didn't make it. He was CEO from 2000 2014. Microsoft, during a time when stocks were going way up, actually declined during those 14 years. And under Satya Nadella, it's gone up 8 times. Why? Because he empowered and inspired the people. He got on a much more visionary strategy of moving to the cloud and moving in with LinkedIn and real technology breakthroughs. He's a real deal. He may be the best leader in the world today. But Bomber had failed as a leader. I don't know why he got 14 years. He should have been out much sooner
Yeah.
because I've worked with Steve. He's so bombastic. It's all about him. Everything's got to go through him. No one wants to work with somebody like that today. Even a Jack Welch, as successful he was in the 80s and 90s, would not be successful with his style today. I can assure you.
That's an excellent point, Bill, because let's say a Jack Welch, and he was known as, his nickname was Neutron Jack, because I mean that was his management style. But then right after that, he picked his own successor, who was Jeff Immelt, and I mean, the company of General Electric, their market capitalization went way down, and they kept Jeff Immelt, the board, for many, many more years, and it could be stated that maybe it was many years longer than they really should have kept him. But yeah.
Absolutely. How did he get 14 years? I mean, the market cap started going down right away. They've now lost 80% of their value. But the important thing is that GE is no more. We have a jet engine division. We have an MRI division. There is no General Electric, which once the world's most valuable and one of the world's greatest companies for 100 years. It's been destroyed. It's a tragedy. I'm not happy to see this because it always was the pace setter. But then they went the wrong way and they got so caught up in consumer finance and things they knew nothing about that they got one problem after another.
Personalities, you've got extroverts and you've got introverts. If a person feels himself, maybe they're shy, maybe they're introverted, can you be a good leader? Do you have to have the alpha, what's known as the alpha personality, to be the leader?
I actually think the alpha personalities are struggling now. The Elon Musks and the Mark Zuckerbergs. Satya Nadella is not an alpha personality. Mary Barr is not. The great leaders I'm seeing are, yeah, there. A lot of them are introverts.
And I was always curious that when you're the boss of, let's say, the company, all right, when you're at home, when you're at your kid's ball game, do you take a back seat?
Oh, I think a lot of people have personality at home. Doesn't work very well. That's a good way of
Yeah.
leading the board. But
Uh-huh.
here's the key: work. There is no such thing as perfect work and home life balance, and work today is very stressful. You have to be the same person at work, at home, in your personal life, in your community. That's the key today. And frankly, with COVID, Andre, we brought in anyone to people's living rooms, so we got to see. Oh, your kids are crawling up on your lap. What's going on? An unmade bed. So people had to be much more real, had to be authentic.
Bill, I mean, I'm not telling tales out of school because you put it in the book. But when you were starting off, your wife is Penny. You have
Yeah.
two boys. You've got John and Jeff. And you really wanted to be hands-on and help Penny, with the housework, with the household things of raising a family. But because of your career you were trying to build, you even mentioned how you felt like you really didn't do everything you really wanted to because you had to be, whether it be at Medtronics or you're trying to build that career. But today, with dual careers, how hard is it balancing that time?
Oh, it's exceptionally hard with dual careers. I see that with my sons and daughters-in-law. And yes, I used to say, I'm going to try to split everything at home with Penny. And she said, Bill, it doesn't work very well when you go to Japan for 10 days on a business trip. And maybe she wants to has a problem with one of our sons at home, wants to get me on the phone to give him some advice. Well, they don't take that advice very well from all the way from Tokyo.
You bring up about delegation. I've known bosses that sometimes that on a outside looking in, that they may have a problem of delegating because they're used to doing hands-on, because in their mind they're thinking, well, I can do it better. So while the employee is standing there, the boss themselves is doing it. Have you found in your life is it sometimes hard to delegate?
Well, early in my career, before I became general manager, yeah, it was hard. I felt like I could do it as well as anyone. But ever since I took on general manager roles, I've never had a job, Andre, where I knew more than the people working with me. And so I had to rely very heavily on them and their expertise. And my only skill was bringing people together to help them step up to a greater challenge. I don't know what's going to happen with Elon Musk, to tell you the truth. He seems to be caught up in his own charisma and his own adulation of the masses. And that's a good way to get in trouble.
Bill, it's interesting you bring up about Elon, because the average person will never know what it's like, A, to be an employer. They're mostly employees. And second, very, very few people ever get to be in charge of a publicly traded company, as you have more of an insight to. Now, it's, the kind of time it takes maybe for one. So let's say Tesla. Then you have another large company, let's say SpaceX. Now you're taking on Twitter, that there's going to be lots of problems ahead. You just have 24 hours in a day.
Elon Musk is one of the greatest inventor of our time. What he's done with Tesla is spectacular, and what he's done with SpaceX, really amazing. I don't think he's going to invent anything with Twitter. We're just getting into a wide open social media site. So I worry about that a lot. I'd like to see him go back to inventing things. Maybe he can come with another breakthrough in energy, a renewable source of energy from geothermal or from some form of chemical formulation. I'd much rather see him do that, because I don't see him accomplishing much of Twitter. Meanwhile, the stock of Tesla is down 37% this year. And, so he better watch out, or he's going to go the route of Facebook or Meta.
That's a good point, because if he's using the Tesla stock as an ATM machine right now, I know this week Tesla has been down very much because he had to sell more shares to do that. Or I'm curious if also you have in your book, and I think it was quoted as Stephen Hawking, who said half the job is just showing up.
Well, it is, Andre. Andre, here's something we did. We did a study at Harvard, how do CEOs spend their time. We found that they spent 72% of their time in meetings with direct subordinates and meetings in their conference room. They spent only 5% of their time with employees, and less than that, 3% with customers. Now, how can you do your job if you're not on the front line? So I believe we need to flip the organization chart and honor the frontline people. Our job is to support them, not control them, not dominate them. If we can really honor those people, when you go on an airline, who do you see? You ever see the CEO? You go into a restaurant, you don't even see the restaurant manager. It's that person, that frontline person. When you see your doctor, you're not seeing the CEO of the hospital. And everything depends on how that doctor, nurse, technician treats you, is your experience.
If you're just joining us, we're so happy to have Bill George. Bill is the author of the new book of his True North series, True North Emerging Leader Edition. We're going to have more, but don't go away. And we're back. We're talking with Bill George. One of the things that surprised me when I read the book was that the leaders that you interviewed that are very well known, I mean, you had mostly a lot from business, but you have other leaders as well too, government and such. They never considered themselves they were born leaders, that they maybe picked it up later on. Did you find that?
I sure did. Now, I will say this, Andre. We're all born with certain gifts. And our job is what are our greatest gifts? What are our greatest strengths? And how can we use our gifts to make this world a better place? That's more than philosophical. You're going to be successful if you use your greatest strengths and you're really motivated with a greater sense of purpose. And so the idea that you're born a leader is not true. You may be smart, but the smartest person in the room we know does not make the best leader. Having compassion for your customers and empathy for your employees, and most of all, courage. You don't learn courage in a classroom. These are all qualities you get by being out in the real world and learning by the dint of making mistakes and working with people and learning from other people.
I just got finished a little while ago reading John Mack. John Mack used to be the CEO of Morgan Stanley, and he went through 30 years of Morgan Stanley and a number of different problems, but during the 2008 real estate crisis, it all came down to the Tim Geithner, who at the time was the New York Fed governor, who was going to be the Secretary of the Treasury, and Hank Paulson wanted John Mack to sell Morgan Stanley to J.P. Morgan, and of which would basically be putting a lot of people out of work, and he said no, he's going to look out for his employees. He would rather, of this 30,000 plus employees plus everything, he told Tim Geithner basically to go jump in the lake. Although, to be honest with you, Bill, knowing John Mack, if you know him, he used a little bit more than I'm using, go jump in the lake, but it was a different thing. But it all boiled down of 30 years of preparation for just 7 seconds of telling the Secretary of the upcoming Secretary of the Treasury where to go. Where the previous CEO, who was Phil Purcell, who was with Smith Barney, was a very get-along kind. He didn't want to make waves.
Well, part of it is knowing how to lead in crisis. And John had led through a lot of crises. I read his book as well. And I know John personally, and he showed a lot of courage. In fact, he was very nervous that they could have gone under. And I remember sitting on the board of Goldman Sachs at the same time. We were all praying they wouldn't, because the shorts are coming after us next, Andre. So what did John do? He went out and found an alternate financing source. I think he was absolutely right. Don't sell out to Morgan Stanley. We got some of to JP Morgan. We got some of those calls too. Not going to work. And just taking two companies and making it bigger is not going to solve the problem. But he did go out and get financing from the Japanese, and he personally put himself on the line, told the Japanese he would deliver for them. And when things were right at rock bottom, and he did come back, and to his everlasting credit, he stayed true. And Morgan Stanley is flourishing today. He chose the right successor in Jim Gorman, and look how they've done.
Were you on the board at Goldman Sachs at the time of all this going on?
Oh, I sure was. It felt like our airplane was going down. The pilot said, "We're going down. You put on your seatbelt and hang on to the seat. Lean back." Yeah.
He was saying
Goldman had a big cachet of cash stored up, 126 billion when this whole thing hit. And we made some moves that you wouldn't have made in normal times. Warren Buffett invested 5 or 10 billion in Goldman. That gave us a big boost. It became a bank holding company. We had to make some big, bold moves. And Lloyd Blankfein, to his credit, carried the firm through that with incredible courage. He got some criticism afterwards, I thought unfair, but Lloyd really led us through that. He and Jamie Dimon did the same over at J.P. Morgan, did a spectacular job. A lot of those, like Dick Fold at Lehman, wouldn't face reality, and so they're gone. They disappeared, and a real tragedy that they couldn't.
Yeah, it's true, because I remember even John Mack said that Lloyd Blankfein would call Lloyd Blankfein, who was the CEO, who at the time was the CEO and chairman at Goldman Sachs. He would call John Mack saying, "John, don't go under because we're 30 seconds behind you." And to know that in addition to all the employees at Morgan, he's also has to look out for all the employees at Goldman Sachs as well. Yeah.
And this is courage. This is real courage. And I think today's leaders need courage to lead through all these crises. That was clearly the crisis. I mentioned the other crisis they're facing now. Look, you don't know how it's going to come out. You have to have courage. You have to have courage to work with the Chinese when they're rattling sabers about Taiwan. But again, I want to emphasize, Andre, you don't learn courage in a classroom. You learn courage in the real world of facing deep problems yourself and having figure a way out. There are no business school solutions, no mathematical formulas. Everyone says after the fact, oh, you should have done this way. Well, that's great. You weren't on the firing line.
Why do you think some leaders lose their way?
They get caught up in external adulation, external metrics, money, fame, and power. Rajat Gupta, who was a friend of mine and very tragic, got caught up in insider trading because he was worth 120 million. He wanted to become a billionaire, and he got sucked into a ring of some people that were not so savory, and he got caught up in that, and unfortunately, he got trapped. And he's a good guy. He was really a good guy, but he should never have gotten caught up in that. Some people want the fame. That's why I worry about a Mark Zuckerberg or an Elon Musk, because it keeps them from doing the right thing. Or they want power. They just want to dominate everyone. It's not going to work.
As a point of what you're talking about, I did 30 years with military, and toward the last 1/3 of my career, I was the commanding officer of many different times in my career. And I would always tell the new commanding officer when he or she was about to take over my position, and if they had never been a commanding officer before, I would always say, remember, when you become the CO, your jokes become a lot funnier. But when you step down, for some reason, they're not as funny. So make that be as a lesson. Don't believe your own press clippings.
Well, I think that's great. And, no one became a great commanding general like you did by sitting in the Pentagon. You got to get out with your troops. And, remember Doug Patton used to do that. And look what he did. But I think, there's a great lesson there. The military always says, we have a great battle plan. Battle plan goes out the window after the first shot is fired. The same is true in business. You don't want to lose sight of the vision. What's our goal? But you have to adapt quickly because the battle's on and your competitors are moving or the marketplace changes and you've got to adapt to that changing marketplace.
The book is called True North, Emerging Leader Edition. I loved it. I thoroughly recommend it.
Well, thank you for having me, Andre. It's great to be with you. You do a great job. I think you're the new Jim Cramer.
Thanks, Bill. Well, if you've got a question about finance or a comment about the show, we'd love to hear from you. Make it pithy and concise and write us at andre@wallstreetwrapup.info. And now look ahead for market information for next week. But first, what popular children's show debuted on this day in 1969? We've got the answer in a moment. Well, what popular children's show debuted on this day in 1969? The Muppets on PBS. Well, are we headed to a recession? What will inflation look like in 2023? Well, coming up next week, we're going to be talking to economist and former director of the Congressional Budget Office, Douglas Holtz-Eakin. Doug was on President George Bush's Council of Economic Advisors, and as director of the Congressional Budget Office, he was in charge of advising economic directions of Congress and how they should act. That's next week, economist, former director of the CBO, Douglas Holtz-Eakin. And as a reminder, we repeat the show on Sunday mornings. Best way, though, is always to set your DVR so you'll never miss an episode. And that's our show for this Veterans Day, Friday, November the 11th, 2022. I hope you enjoyed it. My thanks so much to Bill George for joining us this evening. But always it's you we appreciate for allowing us into your homes tonight. Remember, you can always follow us on all the social media, on Facebook and YouTube and Twitter and WYES.org. So have a great weekend. Have a productive week as well. I'll see you next week. Remember, if it's Friday, it's Wall Street Wrap-Up. I'm Andre Laborde. And remember, money never sleeps. Good night.
Sponsored by New Orleans Distillers, creators of fine spirits and liqueurs. Through dedication to science, art, and passion, blends of tradition and flavor emerge. For you, always locally crafted. New Orleans Distillers, classically Southern.